What if I told you the NBA is scripted? What if I told you I had access to those scripts? What if I told you they involve the Nets and the Warriors meeting in the finals the next 2 years, the second of which after the Nets traded for LeBron James? That may be true, that may not be, but that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. Without further ado, let's get into it. Listen, I want to thank each and every one of you for watching or listening on whatever platform you're, intaking this content from, consuming this content. I really appreciate all the love on all the platforms. If you are listening on any podcast audio platform, such as Apple Podcasts, such as Spotify, such as Google Podcasts, such as any other place you could really get your podcast, I encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. You can find us at Lots of Thoughts Sports over there. And if you're watching on YouTube, I encourage you to check out the podcast on audio platforms as well, if that's more of your flavor. Like I said, available on all those platforms, wherever you get your podcasts. If you are listening on a podcast platform, I encourage you to leave a 5-star review. It would mean a lot to me. Tell your friends about it. And if you're watching on YouTube, click subscribe down below and click the like button if you really enjoy the content. That'll suggest it to a whole new host of potential viewers and sports fans. And that's what we want to do. We want to grow our little community here at Lots of Thoughts Sports. If you're interested in more of our content, you can find us on socials. All the links for this are in the description of wherever you're watching or listening. But you can find us on Instagram at Lots of Thoughts Sports, on Twitter at LOT Sports Pod, on TikTok at Lots of Thoughts Sports. You can find us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, whatever your type of content is on various social media platforms. But you can also find our merchandise and the podcast and the newsletter and all the social platforms on our website, lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com. Once again, lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com. I'm going to get into the NBA talk and the script and LeBron James and his trade and, whatever I was talking about in the intro. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about Damar Hamlin. If you're not familiar with the situation, Monday Night Football, Buffalo Bills versus Cincinnati Bengals, an important matchup for the two of them, both because of playoff seeding. They want to have the higher seed against one another in case they meet later on. But both of the teams, I believe, have a mathematical possibility of the first seed. At least Buffalo does, which results in a bye. And the second seed doesn't. So Kansas City currently holds that position, and Buffalo is trying to, tie that up. Considering Buffalo has beaten Kansas City this year, they want that, at least to be tied, and then they'll get that advantage for the first round bye in the playoffs. But if you're not familiar with the situation, Bills safety Damar Hamlin made a tackle on a wide receiver T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. And I'm not going to get into too much of the medical situation, but essentially he went into cardiac arrest on the field. Perfectly timed hit in the chest area, right at the upbeat of the heart, heart beating, uptick of the heart beating, should I say. And it's a common thing that people watch out for, but probably should be watched out for even more. A lot of youth baseball leagues, you'll see kids, especially pitchers, wearing like a vest essentially under their jersey to protect the heart area. And it's something that can happen. It's very unfortunate. It's a very sad situation, but EMTs were on the scene. They went into 10 minutes of incredibly serious CPR, which was incredibly hard to watch live. And they ended up taking Damar Hamlin to the hospital. And since I'm recording this on Friday, January 6th, around 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, they've given updates that Damar Hamlin is awake. He has had all breathing apparatuses removed. His vitals are stable. He's talking to teammates via FaceTime and medical professionals and his family, which is great, which is absolutely awesome. Football is obviously a sport that a lot of people love to watch. And just like any sport, it's for fun and it's for a career for a lot of these guys, and it's a passion for a lot of these guys. But life is so much more important, and so it's so great to see him recover, even if he's not going to end up playing football again in the near or long-term future. The fact that he's able to talk and live and breathe and potentially walk and resume daily activities is such a blessing. Prayers out to him, thoughts and prayers to him and his family as they continue this recovery process. But it's really awesome to see his his ability to heal so far throughout this, and it's been encouraging. But they canceled that game, and obviously because they didn't know if Damar Hamlin was going to make it. And both Buffalo and Cincinnati, it was early in the first quarter, or maybe late in the first quarter, they were not in shape to be able to play in that game. It was too graphic of a scene, if you will. Guys were crying and kneeling and praying and hoping. But it does make for interesting playoff scenarios. And as much as that doesn't matter, I feel like we can now talk about it with, some care for how the sport's going to go now that Damar Hamlin's a little bit better. And had he passed away, this would have been really an awful scenario. And I don't know how the NFL could continue, honestly. And they would have, because, money is the root of why they do what they do. But it would have been a rough scene trying to kick off if he had passed away next week, especially for the Bills, and losing a teammate like that. But nonetheless, he's still alive, and it's, I guess, irrelevant to the conversation. But in terms of scheduling, it makes it very complicated because the NFL has announced that they're not going to replay or continue play in that game. That game is canceled officially. So it makes for fun tiebreaker scenarios, including one where the Bengals could be a half a game behind the Ravens for the division, in which case, if they face off in the first round, the home stadium hosting that game will be decided via coin toss. It creates a scenario where Kansas City could be a half a game ahead of Buffalo for the first seed, and Buffalo doesn't have the opportunity to win that game against Cincinnati and get up to the first seed to tie them. So the tiebreaker is nullified in the case of Buffalo and Kansas City. But although the tiebreaker is nullified for the first seed, the tiebreaker for home field advantage, if those teams do face off, is fun. If Buffalo does end up a half a game behind Kansas City, then there's a situation where they could play an AFC championship game at a neutral site. And the same thing persists between Kansas City and Cincinnati, if that's the AFC championship game. I don't know what the neutral site would be. It'd have to be somewhere that's not receiving snow, somewhere not too cold, probably an indoor stadium. I know Ford Field in Detroit was often a potential topic, but they're undergoing a full turf replacement. I don't know where that game would be played. My natural inclination is to say LA. If the Chargers lose in the first round, then there's no worry about them hosting a playoff game. But if they win, it becomes instantly more complicated. So, we'll wait and see. I think the scenarios are kind of fun to talk about. It's interesting to think about. But the NFL has made their choice. I don't know that it's necessarily the best one. I think I would have tried to fit the game in somehow. I don't know how they would do that necessarily. Maybe just play it on Wednesday or Thursday, and then have Buffalo and Cincinnati play their next games on Tuesday. And then the first round of the playoffs, have them each play on Monday. I think either way, they were kind of screwed no matter what. So they put something out there that's incredibly complicated, and we'll see how it goes. Now, on to the NBA conversation we talked about in the intro. And I talked about it being scripted, and I don't believe the NBA is scripted. I was obviously joking about seeing the script. But I'm going to talk about something that could be relevant to that, and it's LeBron James and his potential trade away from the LA Lakers. If you're not familiar, I'll read you a few quotes. LeBron James was quoted, I'm reading this via realgm.com. He was quoted, let me see what date this was. I believe it was December. Yes, December 20th. And he was asked about a potential trade after Anthony Davis got hurt again, and he's potentially out long-term with his foot injury. LeBron James said, quote, "Not a question for me. I have no idea. When I'm playing, I show up, prepare, go to work, and get my guys ready to win a basketball game. I play the game. I'm not in the front office, so we'll see. But I'm focused on the game and us trying to win basketball games, especially when I'm out on the floor. Go ask Rob those questions." Rob, of course, being general manager of the Lakers, Rob Pelinka. And it's clear he's saying, I'm not involved, which, I think is a little bit hogwash. He's obviously not making the final decisions, but to say that a player his caliber, both in play and status, is not involved in trade decisions is asinine, in my opinion. Everyone of that ilk, right? Even a little bit lower ilk, if you will, from anyone in the top 10 to 15 NBA player, whether it's Steph Curry or Kevin Durant or Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, they're all being consulted when a team makes a move. You don't want to piss off your star. That's part of the game today. So I don't buy that he's not in on the decision, but nonetheless, he's saying that he doesn't know. He doesn't know what's going to happen. Well, it's been a little while since that, and the Lakers have not done as well without Anthony Davis. And that's to be expected. He should be their best player in theory. That's what they set up the team to do when they traded for him. I talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, but when they acquired Anthony Davis, LeBron James was the best player in the world. And they envisioned a situation where Anthony Davis kind of learns to be the number one over time. And as LeBron starts to decline, Anthony Davis can come into his own and lead the team. And that hasn't happened until this year. I think Anthony Davis has certainly been more aggressive this year that he hasn't shown previously in the past few years since really the bubble. And, he started to show that before he got hurt, that aggressiveness, that ability to lead a team, to be a competent playoff team as the number one option, the certified number one option. And his injury really debilitated that. However, that's really irrelevant to what we're looking at right now, because Anthony Davis is not coming back for a while and his injury is serious, and he'll be back this year probably. But it's not going to be early enough for him to resurrect them into the playoffs, solidly in the playoffs. They might be in the play-in. They're still in the play-in right now, at least as I speak. So they very well could get in the play-in and try to make a run from there, but I don't think that necessarily is going to bear any fruits. So LeBron was once again quoted, this time from ESPN. And this was not really a prompted quote, in my opinion. There was a question around his plans for the future, but I don't think it was necessarily gearing to get a baited response from him. But here's the quote nonetheless. "I'm a winner, and I want to win. And I want to win and give myself a chance to win and still compete for championships. That has always been my passion. That has always been my goal since I entered the league as an 18-year-old kid out of Akron, Ohio. And I know it takes steps to get there. But once you get there and know how to get there, playing basketball at this level, just to be playing basketball, is not in my DNA. It's not in my DNA anymore. So we'll see what happens and see how fresh my mind stays over the next couple of years." He reiterated just before that whether he plays into the future is about whether his mind is in it, not his body. He says his body can keep up and be a high-level player, but if his mind's not in it, then it's not going to happen anymore. And I think this is telling. And I think a lot of people jump at the idea that LeBron is essentially asking for a trade without asking for a trade. Part of me agrees with that sentiment, that it does seem like he wants to get out. Part of me also thinks that it's more of a preparation for a farewell speech, if you will. If the Lakers don't make a contender around him, he's willing to just hang it up and be a full-time dad, full-time, whatever he wants to be, whether it's an executive or announcer or father or coach, or, I mean, he could do anything he wants, frankly. Someone's going to give him money to be in any position in their company, frankly. And there's definitely a nature that it seems like he's willing to do that by that quote. But that's no fun to talk about. It's no fun to talk about the second greatest player of all time in NBA history, potentially retiring when he's still playing at a very high level, easily an all-star level, probably an all-star captain level. Maybe he's not the third or fourth best player in the NBA like he was last year, or the first or second best player like he was just 3 years ago. But he's certainly that top-level player still. And I'm more intrigued to see a potential trade than I would his retirement. I think all NBA fans would. Now, what does that mean for the Lakers and teams around them? Well, the Lakers don't have a lot of their picks. They traded a lot of them in the Anthony Davis deal. So especially notably this year, their pick belongs to the Pelicans. And I believe 2027 is the first pick they could reasonably trade, which means their 2025 pick is also in the hands of the Pelicans, and then a 2026 swap. So they don't hold the keys to their own future, at least not their immediate future. So I don't know that trading LeBron James for a host of draft picks really gets them anywhere. First of all, you have to have a contract that comes back in exchange for LeBron James that can, match in equivalency with the NBA trade regulations. You can't trade a giant contract for a little contract in the NBA. I believe it has to be within 25%. So there's limited teams that can trade for LeBron, limited teams that he would want to play for. He's not going to go play for the Indiana Pacers as much as I love the Pacers' upstart mentality and contributions from young guys like Benedict Mathurin and Tyrese Halliburton. He doesn't want to go to a small market where they're not ready to win, or a big market, frankly, where they're not ready to win. I don't know that Houston's necessarily the biggest market, but they're not obviously not ready to win, and they're a bigger market than Indiana, or a place like that. He clearly wants to, by that quote, he clearly wants to go for a championship. So the question is, what teams have a lot of, or at least a good amount of young assets at least one player on a good contract, or maybe two players on decent contracts that they could trade for LeBron James to have a future in the NBA. Well, that question becomes more complicated when we talk about his extension he signed last offseason. So there's a rule in the NBA that gives a certain amount of time after a player signs an extension before they're eligible to be traded. And because LeBron waited in the summer to sign that extension in hopes that the Lakers would give him some kind of promise that they're ready to buy in and win now, he can't be traded this year. That length of time after his extension puts that tradable window after this year's NBA trade deadline. So the offseason is the earliest he could be traded. What teams could meet demands if they fall short this year? Well, Miami Heat's one of them. It's his former team. They could trade the contracts of Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson, maybe Kyle Lowry instead. They've got some good sizable contracts. They can make that work. And it would be a lot of picks. And maybe the Lakers want to reset and just go back to basics and trade Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook as well. Well, Russell Westbrook's going to walk, but in free agency, but that's besides the point. Trade Anthony Davis as well for a host of picks. Maybe that's the key. There's other situations like the Warriors where they have a lot of young players, right? Jordan Poole and Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody and James Wiseman, and some picks too that they could put on a deal to get LeBron James, and maybe they'd have to throw Andrew Wiggins' contract in there. But you can imagine LeBron, assuming they re-sign Klay Thompson, and well, they already re-signed Klay, assuming they re-signed Draymond Green, LeBron alongside Draymond, Klay, and Steph would be incredible. It'd probably be the best supporting cast he's ever had, to be honest. But there's one team in my head. One team that I wanted to mention would be the Clippers. They could afford him. They have some decently sized contracts, right? Norman Powell's there, a few other pieces that they could include to, kind of combine LeBron James, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard. But I don't think the Lakers and Clippers would do a deal. And the last team that I think could be possible is the Dallas Mavericks. They obviously have Davis Bertans and Spencer Dinwiddie's contract that I think combined would work. And you'd finally get a co-star alongside Luka. The team that I think is best poised to make the deal is your Brooklyn Nets. As you can see, I'm wearing this lovely Basquiat sweatshirt if you're watching on YouTube. Great, overall, a great uniform set, by the way, but that's not the point of this. What could the Brooklyn Nets do to attain LeBron James? Well, Ben Simmons is the contract we're discussing. And they have certain things that if the Lakers are ready to compete now and in the immediate future, but still have some young development, that they could offer, right? They have Seth Curry, who they could do a sign and trade with. They have Joe Harris, both of which are shooters that the Lakers desperately need. They have Cam Thomas, who's a young guard who's waiting for an opportunity, who hasn't gotten a lot of minutes on the Nets. I already mentioned Ben Simmons, but he's a guy who, if he shows a little bit of development, the Lakers could believe in. And Clutch Sports is the agency for both LeBron James and Ben Simmons. So they'd get benefit from this trade happening. And obviously LeBron would have to indicate that he wants to, be traded for this to happen, which I don't know necessarily is going to happen because it definitely impacts his legacy as a whole, but that's not my point. If he does accept the trade, I think Brooklyn could be a possible suitor. But what that does for the Nets is it puts them on a win now spectrum. And although Ben Simmons is an impact defender, an impact rebounder, and I'm not sure they get a whole lot better down the line. They get better right now. And they'd obviously have to re-sign Kyrie Irving in this scenario. But if they do, they have three of the greatest offensive players of all time. And it's very a simple equation. But what does that mean for the NBA script? Why did I introduce this topic with the NBA script? Well, I thought it'd be fun to lay out a scenario where if this was scripted, the NBA would be drooling all over this. So there's three teams in the East right now that are record-wise a little bit above the other teams in the East, and that's the Boston Celtics, the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Brooklyn Nets. And those three teams have some history, right? The Bucks knocked the Celtics out a few years back. I don't remember what year that was, 2017, 2018. The Bucks knocked the Nets out in the 2020 bubble. Or no, I'm sorry, the year after the bubble, the 2021 season. The Boston Celtics played the Nets last year and swept them. And then the year before, and got gentlemen swept 4-1 in the first round. So there's some history between these three teams. And I think the NBA would love for these three teams to kind of battle it out in some combination in the playoffs. So let me set a scenario for you here. Let's say the Nets enter the first round and they get a first round opponent from the play-in tournament. Let's say they're the second seed, right? They get a first round opponent of the New York Knicks. Juicy matchup, right? Inner city rivalry, two teams that already clearly don't like each other. Would be a good first round series. I don't think the NBA or any sports league wants an inner city matchup later in the playoffs just because it limits viewership around the country. But in the first round, it's not going to matter a whole lot. I think the NBA would really appreciate that. And then in the second round, you probably have the second and the third seed face off, which in this scenario would be the Nets and the Milwaukee Bucks. And you'd have probably a long series where in game 7, the Nets move on. And we have the narrative of Kevin Durant avenging the situation where he, his shoe was too big in 2021 and they ended up losing. And that was game 7 as well, in Brooklyn as well. And then they move on and they play the Celtics, rematch, third year in a row. The Celtics, a vastly improved team, the Nets, a vastly improved team, if we're being honest. And they have the potential to move on. And what better opponent on the other side than the Golden State Warriors? And I know the Warriors are down right now and Steph Curry's not healthy. But in my honest opinion, the West is as wide open as it's ever been. The Grizzlies are the number 1 seed. They don't scare me, whether it's the Pelicans or the Nuggets or the LA Clippers. I don't believe in any of those teams necessarily running away with the West. That's just my opinion. And so that leaves a wide open opportunity for a team like Golden State to make it into the 6th seed and take a deep run. And that's assuming Steph Curry is healthy. But what better matchup in the NBA Finals than the Golden State Warriors, Kevin Durant's old team, facing off against the Nets, who have Kevin Durant now, who have Kyrie Irving, who faced off with the Warriors for years until he asked for a trade and ended up in Boston. What better narrative for the finals? You also have Steph versus Seth Curry, assuming the Nets don't trade Seth Curry before that point. The narratives would be set. And for the purpose of, if we're writing an NBA script, let's say the Warriors win. And it's a hard-fought series, but the Warriors win a second championship in a row. And what is that, 5 now for Steph? 4? I'm not really sure. 5, right? 5, because he won 1 without Kevin Durant, 2 with Kevin Durant, then 1 without Kevin Durant. So his 5th ring. And then we have the opportunity for LeBron to be traded, right? So imagine this scenario, right? Nets and the Warriors face off in the finals. This is obviously very hypothetical and for the fun of trying to script the NBA. So don't judge me. But the Nets could now trade Ben Simmons, assuming he didn't perform to where they wanted in the playoffs, which I think is probably likely, to be honest, even though I'm a fan of Ben Simmons on the Nets and I think it's a perfect situation for him to succeed. He's not being aggressive enough, let's say, like he is right now. And even though he's an impact defender, they need one more offensive threat, they believe, to really make a championship run. And so if they make that trade, that aforementioned trade for LeBron James, then the narratives are set for the entire playoffs. I have it laid out for you. Let's say the first round, Toronto, retools, and they face the Nets in the first round. LeBronto, part however many, and this new iteration of the Raptors without Fred VanVleet, without Kyle Lowry, because remember, VanVleet's a free agent, although he probably is taking a player option, but that's besides the point. A new iteration of the Toronto Raptors loses to LeBron again. That'd be incredible. And then in the second round, I think you might know where this is going if you're thinking far ahead. The Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be a playoff team now and in the distant future, really. They have a young up and coming team. Donovan Mitchell is still young, keep in mind. Obviously, Jared Allen is 23, 24. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name right now. Their starting point guard. Oh my gosh. Wow, this is embarrassing. What is his name? Darius Garland. Jeez. I just kept thinking Cleveland over and over again. Darius Garland is a young and up and coming player, and guys like Evan Mobley are still young, making an impact, and they have good bench pieces from Kevin Love to Karis LeVert or Isaac Okoro, even though he's underperformed this year, or Cedi Osman, Dean Wade, right? They have impact players off the bench. And what better team to face against the Nets in the semifinals, the Eastern Conference semifinals, right? LeBron's old team, Kyrie's old team, where they teamed up the first time, back together again, taking out the upstart Cavs, who have now rebuilt since LeBron left. And then you have the Eastern Conference Finals against the Boston Celtics, a team that's still good, that LeBron had rivalry duels with back in the Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, Paul Pierce days, when Ray Allen joined LeBron James in Miami. There's a history with this franchise being rivals with LeBron James and him ending that possible dynasty that the Celtics thought they could have. And so you see that potential facing off at the Celtics, who the Nets beat last year, who beat the Nets the year before, who the Nets beat the year before, right? And the history with Kyrie Irving and the Celtics, and obviously him and Boston having a rocky relationship. And then they meet in the finals with the Golden State Warriors. LeBron James and Kyrie Irving facing off against the Warriors for what? Fourth time now? Well, aside from health issues. The fourth time officially, with a battle between LeBron and Steph Curry back together, once again fighting against each other. But this time, LeBron James and Kyrie Irving have Kevin Durant on their side, have the guy who won Finals MVP after Finals MVP, taking them away from Steph Curry. The first time these guys battled, this time he's on their side. And LeBron James probably as the leader of the team at that point, right? He's definitely more of an emotional leader than KD and Kyrie, leading a team in Brooklyn, coast versus coast, major city versus major city, San Francisco, New York, battling it out. A reunion of rivalries between LeBron and Steph. Only this time, the Nets have more weapons than the Cavs ever did. And so what I'm saying, if I'm writing the script, that's how I do it. And if I'm writing the script, I give that ring to LeBron, right? Obviously, the fourth team now, he'd win a ring on, obviously the two with the Heat, the one with the Cavs, and the one with the Lakers. And he makes a resurgence against the Warriors, against his old foes. Listen, it's obviously not going to happen. This is obviously just a bunch of fairy tale talk, and it's fun to talk about. But if the NBA is scripted, I just wrote them a perfect script. And I don't know. Let me know what you think. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment letting me know if there's a more ideal matchup. I think a lot of fans would be obviously a little bit bored with the matchup after two matchups. I think two is probably a good number where they can leave off at. I think you saw some fatigue with the Cavs and the Warriors facing off for however many years in a row. But I think the Nets and the Warriors would be fun with two, and it would get boring. I think this was a fun thing to talk about, even though I'm a Nets fan. And obviously I want to talk about the Nets winning a championship, of course, especially in this big three era. And I think it would solidify the idea of getting, Kevin Durant and Kyrie way back when. But it's fun to talk about nonetheless. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the podcast. I say this week. It's not really weekly episodes I'm intending to do. But this episode of the podcast, nonetheless, episode 50, One Have Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. Like I mentioned, if you want more of our content, the links are in the description, whether you're watching on an audio platform or listening on, no, I said that backwards. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on an audio platform, click the links below to access the socials, access the merchandise, the podcast, the newsletter, all via below, or the website, lotsofthoughts.godaddyscites.com. Once again, lotsofthoughts.godaddyscites.com. Thank you very much for your viewership and support. I really appreciate it. If you did like this content, click the like button on YouTube or rate us 5 stars on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for everything and have a wonderful rest of your day.